Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. And while we're pretty much ready to start, but why doesn't everyone type in chat where you're from? Hi, Frankie. Hi, Bill. Okay, this is cool. This is pretty representative. So, Abacus, are you ready? I don't think you did a mic check, so I just wanted to
I'm
check.
I'm ready.
Okay. Make sure I have you loud enough. Okay, then let's go ahead and get started. Yay, Olive! Okay, so everyone, welcome to our presentation of our research. It's the Great Push, and it's learning and rapid strategy adoptions, as presented by me, Kay Novak, Kavon Zenovka, and Chris Luchs, Abacus Capalini. We're the co-guild masters of Inevitable Betrayal, a World of Warcraft guild on the Sisters of Elune server, and it offers a place for educators to explore the game and also various activities. We have been less active since we've started a doctoral program. So, despite starting that doctoral programs, we ended up doing research on exactly what we love to do in our free time. And if you want the text or the slides, Abacus just went ahead and put them into the chat so you can look at them there. So I'll let Abacus talk now.
And I'll say definitely the text in the Google Doc you see there represents our best faced our best faith effort to stick to what we what we wrote. But as you know, some of us like to improv. So So my name is Chris Luchs. I'm Abacus Capalini here in Second Life. I'm Associate Dean of in the Colorado Community College system, and I'm also a doctoral student at Old Dominion. I've taught accounting, business, and multimedia graphic design for almost 2 decades now. Wow, does time pass fast. And I've been a gamer all my life, as many of you know. And along with Kay and several other educators, together we've written chapters in research, game-based learning, immersive environments, augmented reality, alternative reality platforms, and ubiquitous learning. So this is a continuation of our World of Warcraft themed presentation we've given at VWBPE. So we're going to go ahead and start off with the overview of what we'll cover this session. So in this session, we'll talk about a welcome, which we just did. Then we'll go into our research methods and questions. And we'll say, well, like, what is the Great Push for those of you that may not be familiar with it? Talking about the learning environment, and then also the unique characteristics of that environment, the learning strategies that were employed, and then tying those back to learning theories that were observed, and then conclusions.
Okay, so we're gonna go all PhD student on you here. We used a mix, and I should say we're using a mixed methods because we haven't fully completed it yet. It's not ready for publication yet, but we use mixed methods. We did crossover analysis. Um, our goal is to advance research on online learning in social virtual worlds, um, especially combining quantitative and qualitative data analysis. In particular, this study, we're using mixed methods to bolster the significant enhancement of research by seeking elaboration of the findings from one method to help inform the other method. And I'm doing my doctoral program at the University of Colorado. Dr. Nancy Leach is a star in mixed methods, and she has gotten me to love mixed methods now. So that's what we used. Now, the research questions, just so you can have an idea of what we were going for here, is We're going to talk more about the event. It was an event in World of Warcraft. It was a competitive event, and what we wanted to look at is the group team learning that was happening and rapid strategy adoption. So these were the questions that guided us. Um, what are the learning strategies and themes? Are there differences in the strategies? Any difference in the strategies completed? And what kind of team involvement was there in these strategies? And where did we collect data? I will tell you, we did it in this very specific area. Okay, we did it in the metagame, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. We did it in the metagame, which meant and publicly facing online forums, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and live streaming places. So this is where we collected the data from. We collected this kind of intel information from places where anybody who is competing in this or helping teams compete in it would be able to see that same information. So that's where we got the data.
All
Go
right.
ahead, Chris.
Sure. So now the big question: what is the Great Push? So the Great Push was first held on May 28th and 21, 20 through 30th in 2021. Try to make it a little bit more clear on my dates. And it was open registration. So this is divergent from what World of Warcraft had done prior, which was only invited certain teams to compete. This is an open registration to any and all players worldwide. And so what it was is you had to come up with teams of 5 players. We're competing for a $20,000 total prize pool. And then prior to the May 28th start, there was a play-in qualification tournament. So that happened on the 22nd and the 23rd of May. And then the top 6 teams from that open, big, huge group of teams, the top 6 would then move on to the actual live cast Great Push, which would then be presented by Blizzard, the company that owns World of Warcraft, and would be going ahead and doing that. So this is open to anyone who played the game. They could go ahead and do it. You had a mix of competitors, as Kay just typed in the chat. It was a mixture of esports professional teams as well as amateurs. Yeah, we collected data. We watched. So what was the learning environment? So this is set in World of Warcraft. And it's a massively multiplayer online role-playing game, and it adopts the Mythic Dungeon International structure, which we'll talk about as we go through this. And the idea of this is that simply you're having teams compete over the same frame of reference. So they're all competing using the same frame of reference. And so what do we mean by that? Well, what we mean is that at the time there was only 8 dungeons. If you're keeping up on your World of Warcraft patches, now there's 10, and that there's 8 at the time. And so all 8 of these dungeons could be selected for any of the teams to compete against. And so the idea behind this is that you have dungeons, they all have the same layout, they all have the same number of bosses, they stay consistent throughout the course of play. And all players are assigned what are called keys. And so the idea behind keys is that the higher the level of key, the more difficult the dungeon actually is. And in addition to having that, those keys there that you're seeing, the table on the right shows the breakout of each dungeon. Depending on how fast the team completes the dungeon, they could increase the key they're awarded at the end by 2 or 3 levels. And so you can see they have to compete against. There's a time component here, and then on the left you also see that there's a list of the keys and how they increase in difficulty by increasing the health and damage of the enemies within the dungeon as the teams progress. Typically for their exactly, Lear. Lots of measurements, lots of quantitative reasoning, as we would say, is there. So now, if that's not complicated enough, in addition to the keys and the dungeons, you also have wonderful things called affixes. And affixes make the dungeons even more difficult. And so these things could be a mix of a variety of um, challenges to overcome. So they go in effect at 2, 4, and 7 and 10 level keys. And basically they do things such as maybe non-boss enemies have more health or do more damage. Maybe bosses have more health and more damage. The players cannot interrupt or use control methods to reduce the number or limit the number of enemies in a given attack sequence or pool. And or it could also be, as we're fond of saying in gaming, stay out of the bad on the ground. Yeah, there's lots of bad on the ground. Even tornadoes can be summoned with some of these affixes. So this slide shows you the standard interface for a user. You can see sort of I blew it up there in the upper right. And really sort of what it does is it gives the name of the dungeon, a list of the bosses within that dungeon that have to be defeated, and it gives you a percentage as of what you need to complete. So the other thing about it is you have to get 100%. The bosses do not count towards 100% number, that percentage meter there. And also not all of the enemies have the actual, have the same percentage. So some are worth 1, some are worth 2, some are worth 5, etc. So they mix and match. So there's different percentages depending on the number of enemies you do in a single move or a single pull, and also the type of enemy that is included in that pull. So the other interesting facet is the tournament realm. So the tournament realm is something that all players get access to 1 month prior to the qualifying rounds, and they have access throughout the finals. So this is where a lot of the teams competed and sort of practiced and got and really sort of sharpened their skills and strategies in. And what it does is allows players to obtain unlimited free max gear and supplies. So there's no cost to them. They're able to quickly gear up their players to the maximum performance level that they need, have the best stats, have the best gear, all that wonderful stuff. And then the other thing about it is it also allows unlimited practice runs, and there's no penalties for failure. So failing a key or failing to complete a key doesn't lower the key like it does in the retail server. Now, what is a team? When we talk about teams, what are we talking about? Well, the teams we're talking about is that for each team, you have 5 players, and there are 3 main roles to fill. There's a tank, there's a healer, and there's damage dealers, otherwise known as DPS. And typical layout is you have 1 tank, you have 1 healer, and you have 3 DPS players who are going ahead and doing this. So you're seeing this as a collaborative team of effort. There's lots of coordination that's going to happen here. The only restriction for the players is that they have to belong to the same faction. And in World of Warcraft, there's 2 factions. There's Alliance, and then there's For the Horde. I mean, the Horde. And so it all sounds simple, right? This is something that's super easy. We've given you just a few little aspects of what's out there. Well, here's some more. Players can choose from 12 classes. Each of these classes has an average of 3 specializations. 6 specializations allow healing options. This sounds like a math problem, doesn't it? And 6 specializations allow tanking options. And there are 24 DPS specializations. Yes, we've got some healers in the house. Nice. So this means, based on just these little factors here, that there's over 2,000 possible combinations for your team, and over 12,000 permutations when we start building into the different specializations, and you start building in the different different special settings and things that you're seeing. And in addition, just because there's not enough variability there's 23 races you can choose from in the game. So you can go ahead and play mix and match, and each race has their own special ability or own special what they call racials, which is their own unique special ability. And this could be higher certain stats or higher percent. It could be being able to disappear and disappear from enemies. There's lots of different things that you can do with these mix and match pieces. So the goal is fairly simple. As we said, there's a time constraint set here on here. So really the focus on this is doing this as fast as possible. And so what do you have to do to complete a dungeon as fast as possible? Well, you have to have the following skills. You have to be an efficient route planner, which means you have to maximize player performance. You have to have efficient communication. There has to be a rapid prototyping and strategy and executions, because as we know, all plans are great until you actually put it into action. And then the other thing you run into is because lots of critical thinking, obviously. The other thing, if you consider the fact that this is a timed event and that the idea is all time bound, and there's no penalty in these tournament realms to fail, then really it's developing that fail fast mentality. It's going ahead and say, okay, this is just not working out. Let's try this. Let's go around. And then also maximizing your group composition and utility. And when I talk about utility, I'm referencing the various abilities of each class the Special Edition offers. This could be assistance with healing or tanking. It could be able to go undetected using stealth. It could be stunning or using abilities to keep dangerous enemies in one spot. Utilizing exploits or bad coding by the developers. Yes, that's fair game as well. And also looking at being able to resurrect players that have died during combat. So there's lots of different abilities that only certain groups, certain players, certain races, certain classes have. And so these are all these factors that are going into the makeup of a team and this learning environment. So you're seeing lots of variables, you're seeing lots of self-determination for the group as far as picking what they feel gives them the best chance to be successful. So unique characteristics about the Mythic Dungeon International format. So one of the things that happens in MDI or Mythic Dungeon International is that it's a level playing field. All teams get the same dungeons to run with the same affixes and start at the same key. And teams are free to choose their own composition. All teams must publicly stream their runs during the tournament, which the organizers archive on YouTube. So there's a record. There's a public record of what they did. There's a synchronous record that's going on, and so that the viewers and fans and everybody can watch the streams. So additionally, all teams have to take the same number of 15-minute breaks during the course of the day, and so they'll have about 8 to 9 hours every day. And there's 3 days to the actual tournament event. There's the top 6 teams doing that. And they had to have the same number of 15-minute breaks. So the other piece to it was that, again, these live streams were public. And so what happened is that if you're on break, you could watch another guild or another team run the content. Your players in your guild that you belong to, that the teams belong to, could watch those streams as well. Fans could watch them as well. And the other thing that's interesting about this is because of the pandemic and that all of these things were done from individuals' homes, if someone disconnected, they just stopped they just restarted the dungeon once they were able to reconnect. And so that was something that that did happen a couple times, but it was not necessarily a significant factor in overall about completion of dungeons. So this is an example of the live streaming you see. So this is they're doing some live casting here, screencasting here, where they're going ahead and showing 4 different teams running 4 different dungeons in the different quadrants you see. Additionally, what happens is that all of these tournaments were held during U.S. Pacific time to allow for the screencasting, allow for the commentary, and this is all known by all players when they register. So this allows them to adjust sleep schedules if they have time differentials when it comes to when these times and time frame is going to happen. However, during the proving grounds, you can play during your normal daily schedule, your normal rhythms based on your time zone. So there's not this requirement in the proving grounds. This is just the final tournament where the top 6 teams compete in. And so the other thing you have is you also have screencasters who provide commentary, highlight strategies, compositions, player highlights, explain specific strategy points and other aspects of the game to viewers. And they'll even do replays of particular examples of high quality play and unique strategies. So these live streams themselves are a great source of information that can be incorporated into the next day or later that day, depending on how these teams are using their networks. And lastly, there's a common scoring system. So the idea here is that it's very transparent, it's known to all players, and what happens is that if you complete a dungeon on time, you're awarded points equal to the key level. So what this means is that if you finished and timed a key level of 20, your score would be 20. And when you complete a new score for a higher level dungeon, that old score is replaced by the new level of the key. So, for instance, if you time a 21 key and previously you had timed a 20 key for that same dungeon, your score would then go from 20 to 21. So it's very straightforward with their add-ons and how this adds up and how it sets up. The other thing about it, there's no penalty other than the time you spend on a failed key. And if there's a tiebreaker, then the fastest time and the highest key completed determines the winner. And if that doesn't work, then the second tiebreaker is a winner takes all playoff, which has happened where both teams are given the same dungeon key and affixes, and they compete head to head on completing it as fast as possible. And so you can sort of see that scoring system right here, where forgot to move that slide ahead real quick. So now we'll go ahead and go into tools. So we talked about the environment. We've talked about special considerations and constraints that you're going to see, that the teams are navigating, various different requirements, very time-bound exercises. So the tools themselves are common. So these tools are available to all players that run Mythic Plus content on the retailer servers as well. So this is very familiar to everyone who runs this, whether you're running it on a tournament or you're running it as a normal player in the retail version of the game. You have access to all of these tools. And so the most ubiquitous tool out there right now is live streaming. And this is just simply streaming your events onto YouTube or Twitch and just posting these, recording these, archiving these, and being able to come back and use these. So that you see. So players are watching other casters' runs as well. They're not just watching their own, and when they're watching their own, they're looking for errors. They're looking for areas of improvement, looking for more efficient routing with different ways to gather up their enemies. To really be the idea here is very efficiency focused. Is how can you efficiently navigate, looking for where you made mistakes, where you stood in bad. Fire's not a buff, nor is red for most of the time, as a common theme for one of the last raids in this game. And the idea here is that you have access to go ahead and look at these different formats. So you're navigating lots of different media. Now, we've talked about math before. What does this look like to everybody? So this is yes, this is more math. This is analytics. So this game allows you to have analytics, so players can log their runs and then go back later and go through this is fractions of it. This is continuous logging, so they can either live log it or they can load it after they are done with the run. So these are things they're using to evaluate their efficiencies, evaluate their rotations, which is chaining spellcasts together or chaining actions together to generate more damage, generate more healing, or mitigate damage if you're a tank. And so these analytic tools are available that everyone can look at. So you can go back, you can research your run, you can see what was going on. You can also go ahead and figure out how can you improve your performance, shave seconds off of certain pools, and eliminate errors that are more like whether it's user error or positioning error. These are all things that they are talking about. The other piece there they have is VoIP tools like Discord. Discord's a very popular tool right now with the gaming community, and it's definitely one of those freemium services. But it's very generous with its free offering, which is one of the reasons why it's been widely adopted. And so this allows real-time communication, synchronous or asynchronous discussion, information sharing, which can be set to public or private. They can also be simple or complex, as you can see from here. There's one menu on the middle there that is very simplified. And then when you look over to the right of the screen, you'll see a very long list. And these are just chat channels and voice channels in one guild group. So they get very large and very complex, and very granular when it comes to what they want in each of these channels and what folks are discussing in those channels. And these are, again, synchronous, could be synchronous, asynchronous. This is like any other VoIP messaging system. If you're dealing with Microsoft Teams or Slack or even Skype, this is very similar technology to that, where you're having all of that. You can store videos here, you can store maps, you can store a lot of different things in your Discord group. So next up we have probably the most essential tool for high-end runners is a map. So what happens is there's a tool called Mythic Dungeon Tools, and this is an in-game add-on that allows players to, number one, see the dungeon map, figure out, and it also shows where all the enemies are in the map, and then allows you to go ahead and plan out what pools, how much you're going to pool each pool, and it actually calculates the percentage of how much each of these packs of enemies are going to go ahead and count towards your 100%. And so that's really sort of one of the things that's really sort of changed the game for a lot of these teams, is that now they have resources where instead of relying on their memory, they actually have an add-on. They actually have something that pops up, they can pull up on their screen, and they can review that pull before, and they can also discuss and change this up. And so they also combine this with the logs you see and the video they see to change up their strategies. Can we go ahead and pull more enemies, can we pull more enemies less frequently, or can we pull a little smaller groups more frequently? So you're seeing that there's this type of decision making that's going on. And I think remember, is this can also be exported, and that, remember, the goal is to hit 100%. It's like kind of like grading. If you if you go over 100%, you still have an A. If you hit 100%, you're an A. But in this context, if you pull more than 100%, you're actually wasting time, because you're killing groups, you're killing enemies that you do not need to necessarily to complete the dungeon. So this is extra stuff that just adds more time. So again, you're seeing that time-driven nature of this group. So when we're looking at this, so what kind of learning strategies emerged? And this is where the fun was for us looking through it. Really, the most popular one is the one I would classify as just too happy to be here. This is the group that, this is a strategy for many. They didn't necessarily expect to be the top 6. They just went in to have fun. This is something they did with friends. This is something they wanted to test themselves out and experience it, and sort of really try out this environment. So the idea here was, this is roughly about 50% or more of the teams. And like I said, the strategy was basically the same as having no or minimal strategy. It was that we're just here to do us and to do what we want to do. And the players just showed up, threw themselves in the dungeon. It was a spaghetti strategy. We just throw it against the wall, see what sticks. And they just saw what happened. So that's what you're kind of seeing with that version of strategy. The next strategy was to practice on live key dungeons prior to the tournament realm opening. And so this was employed by many of the pre-tournament favorites. They did live key dungeons. They would screencast them. This was on the retail server, and the retail server is different than the tournament realm. So remember, the tournament realm, everyone has consistent affixes, everyone has consistent dungeons. In retail, it's random. So you can get any one of the 8 dungeons. You could get, depending on the week, it depends on what affix you got. They changed on a weekly basis. Keys were awarded at the end of the dungeon. Again, they could be for any one of the 8 dungeons. And also, the interesting thing about live keys compared to tournament realms, and live keys, there is a punishment for failing a key. If you fail to time a key, or you go ahead and not, and you just, or you can't complete the key. If you fail the key, then you're given a random dungeon key that's one level lower than the one you just attempted. If you completely fail your key and just are not able to finish the dungeon, then you're awarded the same dungeon but at one level lower. So another strategy that was used was crowdsourcing. Crowdsourcing strategies were used by many teams. These strategies were a result of combined metacognition of the teams, their guilds, their fans, to find strategies, skips, anything else the team could use to gain a strategic advantage. So it's not just these 5 players. You also had a realm of supporting networks that were helping them out. We also saw sandbagging, which was employed typically by higher skilled teams during the early runs. The idea is they would purposely use an inefficient strategy, or they would just rely on brute forcing a dungeon. And the idea here is that, well, we'll just get over it because we have too much gear, or we have, we're going ahead and we're doing things not the way we normally would. And then what happens is, the purpose for this was to give less time to their competitors to adapt or copy their strategies. Remember, everyone can see these live streams in the tournament. And so you're starting to see this gamesmanship where they're going ahead and like, well, we're not going to pull out our best strategies until later on the day or later in the week, because there's only a 3-day tournament. So maybe they pull those out on day 3 is when they'd really show what their true strategies or what their best strategies were. And then again, a common strategy we saw was, instead of going after all 8 keys, they only went after a handful of keys on the first day and did another handful of keys on the next day. The idea was to pick a number of keys. Like typically it was about 4, since there's 8 dungeons, or 6 dungeons. If there were 6 dungeons, they would pick about half of them. And the idea was to try to get them on the first day. Pick a few, try to get as high in those high level keys completed during the first day, and then the second day dedicated to those they hadn't done yet. Another thing we saw from lower performing teams was that they would try to do all the keys, at least attempt one attempt at all the keys, or try to get 1 keys in the book by the end of the first day. And so they're always playing around with their strategy. But by the end of day 2, this is a 3-day tournament, all teams had completed keys on all the dungeons. And then the idea here was going ahead and looking at another strategy you saw was that, or should I say, the last strategy we saw was that a lot of teams had players cross-train. And so remember, we gave you all the facts and figures ahead of time about how many combinations and permutations you could have. What we found is the higher performing teams had folks cross-training. So they had the flexibility to jump to different roles, different classes, and this allowed them to have greater team flexibility and adaptability to counter the challenges they ran into as they progressed higher and higher and more difficulty levels of the dungeons. So I'll go ahead and turn this over to Kay so she can talk about the learning theories.
Okay, so Chris did a really deep dive to let you know what the Great Push was all about, and about how, like, thousands of teams of players decided to use different learning strategies and adopt and quickly adapt to new learning strategies. So when we went and looked at the data and the comments on the forums and Twitter and on Twitch, these were the themes that came out. So it's interdisciplinary, and it is pulled from game studies, education, educational technology, and then business management, entrepreneurship, and innovation. So the first one was the metagame. Players use the metagame, and for people, the metagame is everything that is outside the gameplay that you're actually doing. So all the videos, all the forums, all the websites, Twitter, all the discussions in the different discords, all of this is the metagame. And the metagame means something different to people who play video games. Video games, the metagame is where you find information to get better. And And I just wanted to mention that that's different than the live action role playing LARPing, where anything that's out of character is considered illegitimate. With video games, you being able to go into these sites and know where these sites are and know who to follow is helps you learn, helps you adapt, helps your team learn. And so the other thing that we saw hugely in this is social network knowledge construction. Social network knowledge construction. This is a paper written by Dr. Lisa Dolly, 2009, and it refers to 5 levels of social network knowledge construction. And when we looked at that, the biggest ones that we saw were how quickly people could identify the network, meaning knowing which team they should be watching on live stream. Okay, so there were favorite teams. You had to know them, but then the teams also needed to know who were trying innovative strategies, who were doing things that a little bit differently, or what teams had players that were similar to yours that you could quickly learn from. So identify the network, really important. Also lurking. There was some trash talking on these different sites because there's always trash talking when it comes to gamers. But your lurking skills really were paramount. You needed to know where you could quickly go and passively get that information. Now, the contributing to forums, comments on live streaming, and tweeting out, going to that level of contribute or create or lead didn't necessarily help your team. And there's one thing I should say right here is it wasn't just the 5-player teams. It usually was much more than that. It was usually the 5 players on the team, and then they usually had support. Whether that support was, an esports manager, if it was one of like the really high performing teams, or it would be the rest of your guild. Members of your guild would watch you, and I know Abacus did this with a group, not for the Great Push, but for another group, would specifically watch other teams and go back and report on the strategy to the people who were the team players. So it was a lot about having strong lurkers. And think about that. Think about in online learning. When we say lurkers, it's usually, oh, the students aren't doing anything. Well, this is an example where lurkers who could do environmental scans really, really helped their teams. So the next construct is social metacognition. Now, in the US, in higher education, we talk about metacognition a lot for our incoming university students and community college students. And we talk about that students need to know how they learn best and what their strengths and their weaknesses are. And Peonia, yes, lurking is how you start. Now, social metacognition, it's not about me knowing how I study and what's the best studying methods for me and how I learn. Social metacognition is knowing how your team or your guild members learn best. And when it comes to the education research, this has mainly only been researched in math. Okay? In math, when students are put into groups to work on problems, and then there's been a little bit of research in online discussion boards. So for the great push, a high level of individual metacognition was assumed. And Abacus talked about this, about how you needed to know your role, how you looked at your numbers, how did you to maximize your role. And Chris, if you'll take up the next one, and this is just a quick sketch that we did a comparison. Like I said, we're not published yet, so this will change before we're published. But really, But what this is, for teams and their support, so members of the guild, people who are helping them, high individual metacognition was assumed, but the team's support and guild resources really manifest in the social metacognition portion. Okay, because if you take a look at this, when it came to scaffolding, when it came to morale, when it came to resources, it really was the teams around the people who were going out and finding these resources. So when it comes to this, it would be that there's a 5-player team from the guild that you're in World of Warcraft. You know who the 5 players are. You know their strengths, you know their weaknesses, you know what they're good at. And like Lear's an example of someone I run with, and so is Abacus, 2 people I play with. I know their strengths and weaknesses. So if we go into a mythic key, we might have a discussion about how are we going to try this? What are we going to do? Like what should we attempt next? All of this, all of this is learning that continually happens. Now this is where we went over to the business management, entrepreneurship, innovation field. Um, the construct of absorptive capacity, and this shows up a lot with companies and startups. It's how quick can you get information that's out there, that's sitting out there, and ready for anyone to grab. How quickly can you get that, and how quickly can you adapt? So in education, we don't normally think about this, but when it comes to organizational knowledge, we found that the Great Push was a good place for us to end up finding as a theme absorptive capacity and discussions of how quickly different teams can do this. And it really was a question of, can a team recognize the value of the information? Can they absorb it, take it in, and understand it, quickly scaffold it? And can they apply it? And this was really paramount to it. And so you can go on to conclusions, Chris.
Sure, we'll go ahead and we'll start winding things down with the conclusions. And one of the things that we saw were that the best results were from teams that incorporated a unique strategy. Again, typically displayed on the last day, so the competitors didn't have enough time to go ahead and adapt to them. And that they had a unique strategy that they developed, as well as monitoring what other team strategies were. So they had flexibility. It wasn't this connection that, hey, our strategy is the best. It was always this openness to look at what other teams are doing and adapt. One of the great examples of this was one team did extremely well in one of the particular dungeons using what's considered a guardian druid tank or a bear tank, and then all of a sudden, after within an hour of them completing their dungeon, all the other teams started using bear tanks for that dungeon because they saw the different strategy that they had used and were like, that's a better way to do it. This is a more effective way to do it. And in addition to being able to monitor other streams and compositions, they also had the capacity to swap out compositions and be able to still perform at a high level despite using what may not be the main type of class or character that they would usually play. So they had that flexibility, they had that adaptive, they had that absorptive capacity to change the organization of their team. So highly flexible, highly adaptable teams that were cross-trained at other positions or other skill sets. And then the other thing we saw is that most teams use a similar group composition during a tournament. So typically the tank role was filled by 2 classes, a demon hunter and a guardian druid. The healing role was by far dominated by the holy paladins. And the DPS roles were typically filled by 4 classes, hunters, mages, balanced druids, and rogues. And then the winning team also won using a misdirect bug / exploit. And many opposing teams fans accused that team of cheating. But the organizers were like, well, this exploit was something that everybody had access to, and everybody could have used this, so therefore it wasn't a cheat. It wasn't something that only they could have access to. Anybody could have done that. In that video that Kay posted, you can watch that video later to sort of see what it is. This is a screen capture of that exploit, and the team that won was named as Echo. And what happened is they found out there was a bug, there was a misdirect bug in the game. So a hunter could, and what misdirection does is exactly what it sounds like. It's, hey, I didn't hit you, bad enemy. Someone else did on my team. And so what they were able to do is the entire time, the dungeon, after they reached this set of stairs, there in the lower right hand corner, the hunter would just stand on the stair. Literally, that's their job for the next 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, however long it took for them to finish the dungeon. The hunter would stand there and continually misdirect certain ads that showed up, and those ads would then run to the team wherever the team was. They would run to them because that was who was they thought was attacking them. And then after a while in combat, these ads exploded, and this is the reason why it was so beneficial for them. When they exploded, they did damage to any players in the range of the explosion, but also any enemies within the range of explosion. And so what they found out through many runs was actually these enemies, particularly enemies that they were sending back to the team, did way more damage than that one hunter could do. So much so, in fact, this team actually used a 2-tank strategy, which is considered bad because tanks don't necessarily put out the same amount of damage as a damage dealer class, but they did 2 tanks for survival. And because in case someone accidentally got stepped into the explosion. And so that was the thing. And so the hunter spent more than half the dungeon just standing on the stairs. That was his role for this entire thing, was just to stand there and wait until ads came up and then be able to misdirect them. And the thing is that they had done this exploit so much, they actually knew exactly where to stand, because there's only a certain area, maybe a 3 or 4 meter spot where this exploit would work. And so he had to constantly monitor where he was at on the stairs, and he had to stay where he was at to be able to go ahead and do this. And I know, as we said, some people call it cheating. Kay calls it. Oh, you're muted,
Well,
Kay. Oh, there you are.
okay, I was gonna say, okay, so go ahead and type in. Does everybody know what the Kobayashi Maru is? Just type in Y or N. Okay, good. We're seeing yeses. We're seeing yeses. Oh, no, that's okay, Carla. We'll explain. Yes. Okay, the Kobayashi Maru is from Star Trek. It does deal with Captain Kirk, and what it was will be a test, a test at the Starfleet Academy, and it is a no-win scenario simulation. Okay, and that's how most people define it. Basically what, yes, I don't see what all good heroes teach us. Yes. Okay, so it's a simulation where it's supposed to be a no-win scenario. But I look at it differently, not as a no-win scenario, but as somebody changing the conditions. And what Chris explained, and then what Chris explained, I consider a change the conditions. So that's kind of where we're going to be going with future research. We were able to see different areas where people had changed the condition and adapted strategies. So that's where we're going next. Here's our contact info, and I think you've got 1 minute for questions or comments. So sorry about that, but thank you for coming.
Yeah, so the takeaway from this presentation is whenever your gaming students tell you they don't know how to do math or they don't understand math, you can look at this and ask them what games they play. Same thing for strategic thinking.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Great seeing everyone.